students say they're being censored, not even allowed to bring up controversial points of view, like here at Ryerson University.
I kind of came to the university thinking that it was a place where people could freely exchange ideas, push boundaries, but it was really just this padded room where everybody's trying to control a message under the guise of making everyone safe.
Hey there everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Skeptical Vision, and today we'll be starting off my video career with a series entitled Point of View, where I talk about my views on a variety of subjects, with today's being freedom of speech. Now, for those wondering, as of right now, I will be releasing videos on many different topics such as tech, video games, politics, or anything else that I find video worthy. I hope to refine my area of topics as we go along and I see what is most successful. As a little disclaimer, I do fully realize that anything that is even remotely connected to politics can be extremely divisive and could potentially, even probably, hurt the viewership of this channel. That being said, I do personally believe that the best thing for political discourse is for people to share their views in a clear, respectful manner in order to be as civil as possible. Screaming and throwing tantrums helps no one and nothing. Of course, I could delve much deeper into my sentiments and views on the current political discourse and how I would fix it, but that's a video for another day. One more thing before we get to the main event, I would also like to lay out where I stand politically. I'm doing this to be as transparent as possible and to make it clear to you that even though I will try to be as objective as possible with my research and how I present my findings, this is, at the end of the day, my opinion, and it is, unfortunately, open to bias just like anyone else's. For the record, I see myself as a classical liberal, which, for those who don't recognize the term, means that I'm generally pro-free market and pro-social liberty, to sum it up quickly. Now back to the topic at hand, freedom of speech. It is without a doubt that if you spend even the smallest amount of time perusing the internet, observing current political discourse, or listening to the news, that you will find that in today's Western society, there seems to be quite a focus on freedom of speech. The discussions surrounding the topic range wildly from its legal standing to why it's necessary to the possible problems that it will entail. This makes the discussion very complicated and heavy, despite the term seeming pretty simple and straightforward. For this reason, I will try my best to make myself clear and concise. Of course, to do that, you must know that I happen to believe that free speech is not only necessary, but that it should be practiced in its truest form. I hope that through this video, I will be able to clearly explain why I hold this view and hopefully convince you of the same.
Is thinly veiled racism, but there is a way to fight that, and that is to debate him, to bring up points that you can actually look up in books.
In a healthy, thriving democracy, there is nothing more beautiful than the spirit of civil debate. When two sides decide to come together to express themselves and attempt to solve a problem, everyone is better for it. Debates serve as a tool which allows us to confront our ideas and allow the best ideas to rise to the top. It is a key democratic principle as demonstrated by this quote from Burmese liberation leader Aung San Suu Kyi. To view the opposition as dangerous is to misunderstand the basic concepts of democracy. To oppress the opposition is to assault the very foundation of democracy. Now, admittedly, in today's political climate, a completely civil debate isn't as commonplace as I would like it to be, but when it does take place, it truly is a wonder and a testament to the democratic system. However, for these conditions to persist, it is absolutely necessary that absolute freedom of speech exists and is respected by everyone. Without freedom of speech, it would be impossible for all the ideas and viewpoints to come together and through debate, weed out the worst ideas and strengthen the good ones. When someone is scared or unable to add to a discussion because they fear the repercussions of not having absolute free speech, all of society is hurt by it. Now, oftentimes people who want to restrict free speech do so to prevent giving those who they deem to have hateful rhetoric the opportunity to speak. However, what these people fail to realize is that, as many people have stated before, sunlight is the best disinfectant when it comes to bad ideas. I absolutely believe this, and I can see no better way to execute this idea than by confronting those bad ideas head on with a debate. Let's take a Nazi, for example. As just about everyone knows, Nazism is an absolutely abhorrent ideology with innumerable flaws. So if you were to allow freedom of speech, Nazis would present themselves on a silver platter which would allow you or anyone else to dismantle their ideas through debate, while also exposing them for the world to see. The only way you change these people's minds is by talking to them and showing them where their thinking has gone wrong, as opposed to simply trying to cover them up, which is exactly what not allowing absolute free speech would do. It would be impossible to find those that hold the abhorrent positions if you ban those thoughts and speech, since they would just hide it, therefore making you unable to change their views. Think of it this way. You don't try to fix a crumbling house by covering it up with a fresh coat of paint. You fix it by going in and doing the necessary dirty work. The same applies to thought. If you want to change someone's opinion and fix it up, you have to go in and do the necessary work of showing them their errors, not by stopping them from expressing their opinions. Furthermore, the moment when debate becomes restricted or even impossible is when society becomes vulnerable to tyranny outside the verbal arena. You look at any tyranny and dictatorship, and it's no accident that none of them have anything even close to resembling freedom of speech. From Nazi Germany, to the Soviet Union, to Communist China, or currently North Korea, they all have major restrictions on speech which make debate impossible. Why do they do this? Well, it's actually pretty simple, as many of you may have guessed. In order for these governments to retain absolute power, they need to eliminate dissension. In fact, much of the time, making sure opposing viewpoints cannot be heard is their first step. When no one can call them out and confront them is when the snowball starts its descent and growth into tyranny. This is fundamental to why we need debate and discussions and dialogues with those we disagree with. They keep us in check and serve as a counterbalance for when we go too far or make critical ideological mistakes and vice versa. Let us not forget that banning someone else's thoughts, ideas, and speech can easily be seen as a sign of weakness and lack of confidence in one's own ideas. After all, if your view is so good and theirs so bad, then wouldn't you want a confrontation between the two of you to prove it? You have to believe that not only will bad ideas be exposed for what they are, but good ones will also be given the chance to rise to the top. I personally find it hard to see someone who demonizes debate and who avoids it as not displaying intellectual cowardice. These are the people who are the most needing of having their views challenged, and once again, that can only be achieved through open debate, and by extension, free speech.
Even hate speech is protected, even if it's really hateful, like burning a cross on a person's lawn, although this might be prosecuted as vandalism or trespassing. Public universities that try to punish hate speech have seen their discipline codes struck down.
To begin, I need to make it abundantly clear that the only true form of freedom of speech is to have absolute freedom of speech. Anyone who states that you can have some restrictions on speech yet still somehow maintain freedom of speech is demonstrably wrong, no matter their intentions. Now, I know that may come off as a bit harsh and divisive. However, when you look into what freedom of speech truly is, the truth becomes quite evident. I am also quite aware that those who want and support the restrictions mostly state that their proposed solutions do not infringe on freedom of speech because what they're restricting falls into categories that, according to them, fall outside of the realm of freedom of speech, such as the term hate speech that I mentioned previously. The thing with hate speech is that, like any other type of speech, it is included into the broad umbrella of freedom of speech. It does not matter if what you consider to be hate speech is propagating opinions and views that you find abhorrent. They should still be protected. As for the worry that allowing speech that is considered to be hateful could potentially be dangerous, I would respond by pointing out that would it not make sense to allow those who we deem to have reprehensible views to expose themselves? After all, banning this speech would simply be an attempt to cover it up and would not in any way solve the problem or change the people's minds. If you want to do that, you have to identify them and then demonstrate to them that their way of thinking is flawed and that there are much more reasonable ways of thinking. None of this is done by banning speech under the term hate speech. Now, to return to why hate speech is actually part of free speech, we need to look no further as to the definition of freedom of speech itself. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, freedom of speech can be defined as the legal right to express one's opinions freely. I chose this definition as it is the simplest, clearest, and least vague definition that I could find. Here we find a clear indication that freedom of speech is clearly a right which focuses on and protects an individual's ability to express and share their opinions. If we were to look at the legal definition, also given by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, we would find the following on freedom of speech: the right to express information, ideas, and opinions free of government restrictions based on content and subject only to reasonable limitation, as the power of the government to avoid a clear and present danger. Here is where we find the first point of contention with the use of the term reasonable limitations. It is at this point that those who champion the banishment of certain types of speech believe they are able to do so. However, if you cross-reference both versions of the definition, you find that only speech which presents a clear and direct threat to the physical person could be included within these reasonable limitations. This is why, to use a famous example, yelling fire in a crowded movie theater to cause a panic is illegal, since it puts people in danger due to the ensuing chaos of everyone trying to escape. And your words don't actually represent an opinion for you to share and express either. This is also the case for death threats, threats of violence, or threats of rape. In my opinion, the only place where freedom of speech does not apply is where the speech incites a clear and direct threat to the physical well-being of a person. Since no actual opinion is being shared in any of the above situations, they don't truly belong to freedom of speech, as opposed to hate speech, which does contain real opinions. Within this view, the intellectual verbal space is protected, as well as protecting everyone from violence. This interpretation of mine fits into both the normal definition and the legal definition. This is true, since everyone is still able to express their opinions, but there is still the ability to prevent clear and present danger. Now, I am not the only one to share this viewpoint or something analog to it. In fact, the Supreme Court of the United States also agrees that freedom of speech also encompasses hate speech. In the 2017 case, Mattal v. Tam, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito wrote, "Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other similar ground is hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate." With Justice Anthony Kennedy also adding, "A law that can be directed against speech found offensive to some portion of the public can be turned against minority and dissenting views to the detriment of all. The First Amendment does not entrust that power to the government's benevolence. Instead, our reliance must be on the substantial safeguards of free and open discussion in a democratic society." Clearly, even the world's best legal minds agree that no matter how hateful the speech, freedom of speech not only protects, but it does so seemingly counterintuitively to protect the populace in the case of tyrannical government.
And these clowns out in Berkeley are saying he's a Nazi. One person last night said, "Hey, we should do exactly what people should have done when Hitler was rising." Well, somebody tweeted back, "You actually are. You were harassing a Jew and committing violence because a Jew wants to talk. So, yeah, congratulations. You are doing what Hitler did."
In my first point, I mentioned the authoritarian states of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and North Korea. I use them as examples of governments which had enacted restrictions on freedom of speech, but that devolved into hellholes for just about the entire population. This phenomenon has happened time and time again across history. At first, a government will enact some restrictions on speech with the guise, whether honest or not, of protecting its citizens from some sort of, in their eyes, dangerous opinion. If these opinions and views were barred from being shared, then society would benefit according to these authoritarian governments. And unless you consider some of the most brutal conditions ever experienced or the worst human rights atrocities ever committed as a result of a reduced ability to speak out, a benefit to society, then you have to admit that these policies have failed in their intended goal. It is no wonder that the countries that have the freest speech are also top-notch when it comes to other human rights as well as being prosperous economically. If we were to try and compare what has happened in the past to what is happening at the moment, we can see direct parallels. Nowadays, one of, if not the biggest reasons that we see in favor of implementing some form of restriction on freedom of speech are centered around avoiding any statement that could cause great offense to someone. Now, on the surface, this may seem as something very positive, since if no one is able to say anything outright offensive, then we could all live in peace and harmony. Problem is, nothing is ever that simple and straightforward. As Professor Jordan Peterson from the University of Toronto put it in his interview with Cass Newman for Channel 4,
why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
the unfortunate truth is that offense is subjective, and anything anyone says can be deemed offensive by another. Just think about it for a second. If what you want to do is protect people from offense, then any single instance of speech being deemed offensive by as little as one person would have to be restricted, and in a world of billions, there's always going to be someone. To bring this back to the point of the tyranny of protection, as I just showed, it really is not difficult for a government to start restricting speech and then having it spiral out of control to the point where basic thought is nearly or completely impossible. This snowball effect has been demonstrated in such literary masterpieces as 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, as well as being experienced in the communist states of the 20th century, Nazi Germany, and fascist Italy. In fact, in 1984, which is widely considered the best dystopian novel of all time, and easily the most popular, we see the term thought crimes come up. Anyone caught thinking or saying anything that the government disapproves of is punished for something seemingly so innocent. This Orwellian dystopia isn't so far away at all if we allow the restriction of speech. I realize that this may seem apocalyptic or perhaps too far-fetched or even a bit of fear-mongering, but I assure you that freedom of speech, as the cornerstone of democracy, holds an incredibly important position which, if compromised, starts society down a road that leads to no good end. It is no accident that every society that has attempted to abridge freedom of speech has ended with humanitarian horrors of the worst sort. What is important here isn't the intent of trying to protect the population, but more so the disastrous effects that its implementation will lead to. As the famous saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. All in all, I hope that across this video, I've been able to adequately explain why freedom of speech should be tolerated and allowed to exist to its fullest extent. I do still understand, however, that at the end of the day, this is still just one person's opinion on the internet, and that you are free to disagree with me even if I wish it were not so. Whether it was the entire concept of the video or something small that I said, feel free to sound off and tell me where you think I went wrong. I know that this video was a bit on the longer end, but with such a broad subject, I felt it necessary to take the time and really dive into it. Today's video was sponsored by My Hopes and Dreams, so if you guys like the video, don't forget to like it. If you dislike it, hit the dislike, and if you guys want to see more of my content in the future, press that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for instant notifications for my videos. Till next time guys, goodbye.